I'm Monica Johnson with Marshall Weber, and this is Bookland Calling. Welcome to our show, where we talk about artists, libraries, and social justice, among other topics. Marshall and I are your hosts. We're both artists who head up Bookland Inc., an arts nonprofit located in Brooklyn, New York, on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape people. And we started Bookland Calling to amplify voices in the artist book field and to explore art making as a tool for community engagement and for social justice. And so ideally, we're going to explore some of these stories that aren't necessarily documented within the work itself. And we're also interested in finding out new aspects of material culture and how art interacts with social justice. And we do this by talking directly with artists and practitioners in this field. And today we have an extra special guest because this person is both an artist practitioner and a librarian practitioner. So I would like to welcome Sauda Mitchell. Welcome, Sauda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I'm just going to say who you are for a second, and then you can tell us all about who you are. This is what I think you are. You are. Okay, so Sauda Mitchell is an American printmaker, an archivist, and an educator from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She holds an associate's degree in elementary education from the University of Phoenix, a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Art with a minor in art history from Savannah College of Art and Design, and a master's degree in library and information science from Drexel University. And she's certified by the Academy of Certified Archivists. Currently, she serves as the SCAD Gen Library Archives and Special Collections Librarian at the Savannah College of Art and Design. So before we get into your work, I just want to start by talking a little bit about you, Sauda, because I am literally exhausted.
Oh my gosh.
Like inserting myself in all of those degree programs, which I am not implying I am in any way bored by them, but I just can't go on without recognizing these are very interesting progressions that lead us into understanding Sauda Mitchell, the person we are going to talk to right now. So could you talk a little bit about what that journey was like, and was it contemplated, or did you take different directions for different reasons?
Well, thank you for working your way through all of that. 'Cause even when I read it, that's kind of my response about my own educational journey. I'm like, what in the world? Okay, but really, I started, wanting to learn more about cognitive development due to a personal circumstance where my son was evaluated and labeled as developmentally delayed. And so, through my own personal experience going through the educational system as a child, the same thing happened to me. And I was misplaced into classes where there really wasn't a focus on the way in which I learned. It was more test focused. And when I was retested after, some attention being given to, that I might be a visual learner, as more research developed, I think, those ideas about there are different ways to learn. I mean, now we have Montessori and all those things, but when I was in school, I'm not going to say how long ago that was. It wasn't a focus. And so, when I was retested, then I was gifted and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, right. Okay.
What's going on here? And so, when my son was determined, that he was developmentally delayed, I just jumped in and jumped at the opportunity to actually learn about cognitive development because I wanted to be able to navigate his educational journey a little bit differently than the way that mine was. No fault to my parents at all.
Right.
But it was just a different time in those years. And so that's where it really all began. But when I was in middle school, that's when I first engaged with libraries. So that's where it actually started.
Hmm.
Volunteering in libraries and having a love for art and libraries at the same time. So as I decided upon, a career path, I wanted to combine as many of my interests as possible. And so that's where I kind of started with elementary education and then kind of veered into art. And then after that, going into library science and concentrating in archives. And so, and now, as of yesterday, I just started on my doctoral
Oh
degree
my
at Drexel.
gosh.
So I'm back, Monica. Like, there's more. There's more.
Wow.
So
Oh,
I am again returning back to education, having, creating, working with artist books and making books and thinking about the history of the books and thinking about books as educational tools. I'm back at square one again, but on a
mm,
doctoral level, and I'm looking at ways to engage. Um, or look at the intersection between marginalized students and archives-based engagement and critical analysis of primary sources,
Oh my
all those things
goodness.
going back to education and just kind of merging art and education and archives into one profession.
Okay,
wow.
Marshall, I'm like, my mind is a little blown right now. And
Monica
like,
needs to take a nap.
yeah, so I'm just gonna like pass the baton to Marshall because I need no, I think that is wonderful. I first of all want to
Yeah,
just like as a parent myself, with
yeah,
a kid who has, what is termed special needs. It's always
yeah,
complicated to
it
understand
is.
what that means. I just want
Yeah,
to acknowledge like that is just an amazing investment in your son and in parenting in general. And good on you for starting with that. And I love that there's still like a thread as you move through all these stages. And I want to also say, I don't know that I would ever think of you as being at square one, although I'm sure that's sort of
yeah.
a nice sort of reset place to be in to feel like, okay,
Yeah.
I can start again. But yeah, let me take a beat and process all of this. And Marshall, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes a person's credentials don't really reflect on their life path or their work, obviously. But with Sauda, I think we can see um, if you know Sauda's work at all, her art, either her academic work, her scholarly work, or her artwork. You can kind of it's evidenced in the work. It's very interesting. And the first thing I think is at Bookland, we have this saying that artist books are like children's books for adults. And the thought behind that is because they're engaging even with language at a visual level and using, combining text and imagery as a primary tool to like engage the reader and to engage different parts of the brain in the kind of acquisition of knowledge and the function of memory. And so when I hear you talk about, this whole conundrum of the special needs, that whole category is weird. And when I grew up in the 60s, when that category was distinctly punitive, the special class was a place they put the bad kids, the kids who were determined not to be normal. And the binary was pretty strict and awful. And that's changed a lot, I think. Um, but it kind of makes me think like, what we lose. I remember when my daughter went to first grade, came home in tears and she said, there's no pretend corner anymore. There's no, costumes. And like, she hated school from then on. She was like, for her, school just seemed to be this conspiracy to crush her imagination. Um, but you really, and one of those shifts that happens is we take the, picture books away from the children and we give them these books filled with English. And coincidentally, that is the same time when a lot of children have trouble with kind of so called normal early childhood education, right? There's this distinct fall off for kids when they get to just the complete text based learning. when it immediately eliminates the visual learners, right? So, Sada, I'm wondering, like, what are your goals in terms of your studies and your art? And to me, it's interesting. I don't want to kind of make things all deliverable, but
Yeah,
uh, y- you know, I suspect that you are the kind of person who has goals
yeah.
in terms of like looking at these issues, both it just makes me think of like how your child, for instance, engages with your artist books.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to kind of elaborate on all this.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm coming from a place where I'm taking my lived experience. I'm also taking experience as an educator myself and an artist. And my goal is to um, kind of look at educational organizational systems and try to figure out a way to not only, reform, but to make room for creativity and innovation, which is my concentration in my program. So it's educational leadership and management. And my concentration is creativity and innovation. And so I'm thinking about how can I use the tools and the experience and the art making, that I have and kind of implant that into the way that educators think about educating students from multiple backgrounds, social standings, regardless of where they come from. But how can we use sensory experience to elevate their cognitive development? And we know that there is a connection between the two. But how can we use that for students who are marginalized, and not necessarily, by their choice, and provide a pathway to elevating that cognitive development in those students through creative works. So, whether that be through nonprofit organizations, whether that be through higher education administration, I'm not quite sure which direction eventually that will land, me, but I just want to have the tools and the credentials in case, I'm able to be effective in that on that level in that area.
You know, these are goals that kind of address systemic issues in terms of education. And I don't know, using the current language, I mean, it's, I think there's almost a decolonization of actual learning style and pedagogy going on, as well as the other kind of, you know, goals of decolonization going on in this country. Um, but I'm really impressed with the holographic nature of your work. It's like if you look at one of your artist books, which incorporates a lot of different sensory experience, they're often sculptural, but they also have text, but they also have QR codes that link to other experiences. They often challenge the book form and kind of disrupt the reader's ability to easily engage with one aspect of the piece without engaging in the other. Like kind of the form and the content are very wrapped up. They're very personal, but they address historical issues. So it's almost like your books as objects and literary vehicles sort of reflect your larger theoretical and pedagogical concerns. And I mean, I can say as a curator that I don't see that coherence very often. I mean, many people don't even work in that kind of spectrum, in terms of like being in a educational doctoral program and then also being an exhibiting artist. Not a lot of people are bridging that gap while also being a practicing librarian and archivist. So, um, again, we're kind of back to that impressive Renaissance person nature of your work. And I'm wondering if it's like, is it all intentional?
Mhm.
It's like, is it intuitive? Like, how did you
Mm.
manage this coherence? And are you? I mean, do you see it? I mean,
That's a wonderful question, and I really appreciate the way that you articulated that because it's a little bit of both. Um, intentional in a way that when I'm making my art, I am thinking about how viewers will engage with it based on if there's text or no text. But some of it is intuitive because when I'm in the process of making the work, um, it's also emotional because of my cultural ties to the subject matter and the themes that I'm exploring. So it's a little bit of both. It's kind of like a little recipe, and I just don't know how it's going to turn out. But, there's always the idea in the back of my mind, if I don't use text, then what am I asking the viewer? How am I challenging the viewers in their thinking when they're engaging with this work? Or if I do use text, how can I use text in a creative way, whether I'm using a poem or, or if they're linking to an digitized archival document, what do I want the viewer to explore or reflect on when they're engaging with the text, not necessarily mine, but of a primary source. So it's a little bit of both.
Oh my God, this is so good. I love that. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. This is wonderful. I'm really enjoying the way that you are effectively talking as an artist about the work that you're creating, and that you're thinking about the audience, and at the same time understanding that the framework that your work exists within is as a primary resource. That's a beautiful thing. And I don't know that that's true of many artists out there that I've heard of. It's sort of like the work gets created and then the paradigm shift happens to then look at it as a primary research. And I think in your answer, what you're describing is that you're not an artist over here and a librarian over here. The reality, I think is always true, is that we are the people that we are, and we live at the intersections of all of our investments and activities. Can you talk a little bit about who that audience is in your mind then when you're thinking? Like, what is the audience something that would suggest people who access libraries, so in some ways a general public, or is it a
Mhm.
little more tiered or nuanced in your
Mm.
mind?
Um, I will say, having or recognizing that I'm in that place of, working across these different disciplines, and that's only been recent. I had to give myself permission to be in that place because I'm such a person that, I like to compartmentalize things, and my life is one of those things. And so for a long time, especially, being an archivist and our profession not really um, only in recent years have archivists even seen themselves as having a responsibility to social justice and to change and to be activists. So it's only been recently that I've given myself permission to kind of cross that line and kind of transition from the gatekeeper role into an archivist that I can boldly create this work and not feel as if I am, interjecting my own personal feelings and feel like there's a repercussion because I'm not supposed to. Um, so I think, with that being said, when I'm creating the work, I am thinking of my audience as students because I've been, I'm an educator, so I'm thinking about experiences that I've seen them have with primary sources. And I'm kind of gathering that and thinking about, wow, if I use this story or place this material with this other material type, what reaction will the student have based on the sensory experience of this material type? And so I'm thinking about student, I'm thinking about the public, I'm thinking about the African American collective memory, and I'm thinking about our experience with archives traditionally as places, where our representation isn't always visible. And I'm thinking of my books as a way or as a portal, if you will, through the QR code to introduce to some and then make more comfortable to others that space and the possibility of research and being comfortable enough to navigate and be in those spaces to perform that research for self-discovery. So there's a lot of different audiences that I'm thinking about.
Wow, that's great. It makes me think about some of your audiences that
Mhm.
I have seen have
Mm,
reactions to your
yeah.
work, and there's been I mean, I think um, since you come to the field of artist books with a mature body of work and a very strong theoretical and scholarly background, and it's apparent, how quickly um, it's a that is apparent by the fact that how quickly your work was accepted into the field and how interested people are in your work and how well received it was. Um, but we've also had some interesting interventions and reactions to the work that have to do with all these issues that you're talking about,
Yeah.
um, both the content and the form
Hmm.
and those relations.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, I hope
but
you're going where I think you're going.
yeah,
Oh,
uh,
I love this so much.
so
Okay.
one of your pieces is called "Never Forget,"
Yes.
and I want you to just, rather than me describe the piece, I'd like to hear your description of the piece from your perspective, and we can kind of maybe dive in a little bit on the
Yeah.
issues that this particular piece has raised, because it really illustrates everything that you're talking about.
Sure. Um, and I must say, Never Forget is, I guess, what you would probably, what I would consider my first artist's book that I ever made. Um, and you know, it came from such a place of emotion because I created this artist book during the pandemic. And I was experiencing all of these emotions of helplessness. I was watching the murder of George Floyd being replayed over and over in the media. And so the book itself served to document history. It's a memorial to the people who were murdered, but it's also a memorial to significant people that transitioned too soon. And so, in the absence of words, that was intentional. The monochromatic, color scheme, that was also, a choice. And then to create the book in a way that it's sculptural and it doesn't close. It doesn't close in a way that in a traditional book format, because it's a wall. It's a wall of protection, and I don't know if that was always, or if I had enough opportunity to communicate that. And so I'm a mother. I have a son, and when I created this book, it was my response to my environment and to the civil unrest. And so the protection that I felt as a mother that I did not have, when my son leaves my home and out of my presence, I kind of turned my attention to this artist book and I created that fortress, that wall of protection for the people that I couldn't help because I felt helpless. And so, within museum walls, there has been dialogue and reflection and acceptance and pride and reclamation and all of these feelings that have been expressed to me whenever I tip into the museum and talk to people about the piece. And my intent was that viewers contend with the question of what it means to be a person of color in America, regardless of space and time, because you not only have George Floyd being printed, on one side, but you also have Emmett Till, and so it's a contemplation, without text, just so viewers can see the imagery, and then I'm hoping in their mind, they'll understand the history of violence against Black bodies in this country.
Now, before we get to the issue that I know Marshall will get to,
There's a few of them.
yeah, I just wanted to add a few more details to it because, like you said, there's Emmett Till, there's George Floyd, there's Ahmaud Arbery, there's Breonna Taylor, but then there's also John Lewis, who passed in 2020, Chadwick Boseman, who passed in the same year, Toni Morrison in 2019, and you already you said that, like, people who left us too soon. Could you talk a bit about the relationship between the people of color, the Black people in here that have been murdered by the police as a result of state violence over the years, and then people like John Lewis, who was not, Chadwick Boseman, who passed of cancer, and Toni Morrison, who I'm not sure what the cause, but who have largely been like cultural icons who have contributed to the
Exactly.
canon.
Yeah, that was intentional. The reason why I placed, you know, those individuals, the icons, in the same space physically in the book, they're in the same space, they're inseparable. The reason why I did that was because with the murders of Black men and, historically the lynchings of Black people in this country, immediately they're demonized after they're murdered, or, there's something brought up about their background, that's completely irrelevant to why, they suffered this violence. And so I intentionally incorporated Black icons in the same space to say that, although the attention is automatically turned to what, society feels like they may have done wrong in their past, as if that's a justification for death, um, there are, historical figures throughout history, that as African Americans, we feel proud of their accomplishments, and we never want to forget them too. So by placing them in the same book or on the same side in this fortress, it's a place of mourning and reflection, but it's also to say that they're people too, just like the icons that we
Mhm.
admire and revere, and they didn't
And
have a chance to reach those potentials.
yeah, exactly.
Who knows
Yep.
what they could have been.
And you know what? It also, uh, maybe this is what you were saying already, but that it adds to the layer of protection.
Mhm.
If you protect Breonna Taylor with Chadwick Boseman, for
Mhm.
example, or put
Mhm.
them together, there's some kind of cultural armor
Mhm.
that Breonna Taylor gets to have.
Mhm. Yeah. It's to remove them from that negative light, from the, things that were said about them in the media, and to place them in a different light in the perspective of the viewer.
Well, yeah, I think that's interesting because even today, I think for Black activists, artists, actors, it's such a slow and much more difficult process to build the positive brand, right? And so it's kind of referring to that, all these people have struggled and ended up at different places, not always due to their own qualities. I think that the piece makes that apparent. Um, there's also something in the, in regard to the audiences, like a lot of people who have acquired the not Never Forget books from Brooklyn have been university libraries. And so, which is interesting because they have to deal with the fact that this is not a book that is just going to be put away and shelved. So it from the very beginning, it fascinated me that this book was like an intervention into the very notion that you could just put this book on the shelf and forget about it. Like you literally can't. And yet there literally are pages. Like the book is more of a wave structure. Like the pages are curved into one another and the book is kind of open, like you said, like a wall. Um, However, it is not an accordion fold. It cannot be folded shut, cannot be closed. It is a book that cannot be closed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was kind of for me, I have this kind of horrible selfish moment when I see something I really like, that I think is an effective piece of artwork. And I go, gosh, why didn't I think of that? It's just like, what? And there's also a moment of, both being envious and jealous of the, kind of a professional artist thing. But then there's also a moment of just like, it is amazing that again and again, I am confronted with artwork in the book form that challenges anything I've seen before, formally, materially, structurally, content-wise. Like you keep on thinking. There's something about the book that has an imprimatur of, authority, whereas with a painting you go, oh, that's a crazy painting, and like, oh, they're doing something new in painting, and like, oh, the canvas isn't square, that's really cool. But with the book, it seems like there's a lot of limitations to the codex, to the scroll. But again and again, I've seen artists do really amazing things to challenge those limitations and to still use that kind of icon of the vehicle of knowledge and spiritual inquiry that books have pretty much across the globe. And your book did that to me. It provoked that reaction of like, wow, this is something new. This is a real conscious intervention that people are going to react to. And it's also just, brilliant. It's a simple, great, direct idea that brings forth all these other sculptural kind of associations. Like even Maya Lin's
Okay,
Vietnam
okay.
Veterans
Before we
Memorial.
get into that, I'm so famous for cutting Marshall off to be like, yeah.
Someone needs to do it.
Someone does, and I mean it with the most love and respect that I have for you, Marshall. But we've put down the breadcrumbs. Now let's get to the thing. There was a reason you brought this up, Marshall, right? That there was
yes. Okay. There was some reactions to this particular piece. Like some people did not understand that the book actually couldn't be closed. And it was almost as if they had this wish, even seeing the pictures, reading the description, they had this kind of wishful thinking that, but when I get it and we need to put it away, we can just like close it and put it on the shelf, right? And then there was another reaction about the craft, the level of what I like to say, the level of craft excellence, which people often quote to me. And I have to there is a backstory to this. Like, this is not a super expensive fine press book. This is a $500 sculptural artist book that is, from my perspective as both a distributor and a curator, and I think I can say from Sauda's perspective as an artist, this is a pretty affordable piece of artwork for institutional settings. And we got some crazy reactions. I don't know if you want to comment, Monica, on
Well, I don't know them as intimately, but I mean, I could paraphrase. What I heard indirectly was just that it didn't meet the expectations that the photographs implied. And it really was about the book being able to close that was the most upsetting. And that actually, Sauda, that was the first time in the history of coming to know your work that I really was like, oh wow, this is amazing. And I just thought, that's the best thing about the work. That's actually the best. I mean, all the content brings you to that point to go, that's the best thing about the work, because it wouldn't be the best thing about just any work that wouldn't close. But it's this subject matter that makes it so brilliant. But that's all I know, Marshall.
Yeah. And well, first of all, I want to backtrack and say, Sauda's work has impeccable craftspersonship to it. Like otherwise, it couldn't travel.
Yeah.
Her work would not be as well received, and probably wouldn't be represented by Bookland, just to give another inside scope there. So I was really interested in how kind of attitude and inherent bias, when challenged by kind of a disruption of form, combines to kind of, it confuses some people. Like they are challenged to find a way to fit this piece into their perspective on what the piece should be. And it seems as if it's driven by the material form, but I think it's driven by the content.
Okay.
And I'm wondering how you feel about that, Sada.
Well, there are a few things, you know, that I could definitely talk about. And I have to start by saying, I have to give you credit, Marshall, because when I was making this book, I didn't start off with an intention for it to be confusing. Like that wasn't the goal. But when I spoke to you, after you had certain conversations with different universities, and I was getting the impression that the format, was being misunderstood, or not being completely receptive of the materials and the way that they are interacting with each other. It's paper, and I think initially, um, I had to go back to, um, just my experience as an artist and being critiqued. And I had to really come to grips with the fact that, okay, everyone might not like everything that you make, and you have to be okay with that, and you have to be ready to sometimes even explain, why is it challenging to viewers, or why is it challenging in terms of understanding how to store and box, and explaining why the craftsmanship is the way that it is. And so in doing so, it really brought me back to a place where, historically, African art has always been, in terms of comparison to Western art. Oh, it's primitive because it's a mask and there's matted fibers and the paint is, all these things came to my mind. And I had to recognize, don't be offended by the feedback that you are receiving, because after all, everyone isn't aware that African art and African masks were your inspiration for this piece. And I looked at masks, and I looked at the matted fibers, and the use of wood, and the wood isn't painted perfectly, and all of these, what we would in the Western world, what we would consider imperfections. To another culture, there is no expectation to be perfect. It serves as ceremonial. So even the use is different, in the same way that this book serves as a memorial. um so I had to kind of bring myself to that, and just not be offended as an artist because I'm receiving this feedback. But that's to say that, it also kind of brought me back to, and Marshall kind of sparked this thought process in my mind when he kind of shared that, well, the book isn't meant to be closed, and you won't forget it because you can't close it. And then I thought about it, and I was like, yes, like, yes. Like, I didn't even really think of that when I was making it, but to Marshall's credit, I'm like, yes, because that's so true. And then I thought about, how just how Black bodies are viewed, We haven't had control over our bodies because of slavery. And as women, our bodies were used for medical studies, and men, our husbands and sons were lynched. And so, this is a way, in a way, the interaction, the engagement that the viewer has, or the student, or the faculty, or whomever interacts with this book, it's forcing you to have an acknowledgement of this piece, and you have to, in a way, acknowledge these people, and that you cannot manipulate, you cannot close, you cannot have control over their bodies. And that's the way that they died, with someone having control over their bodies, which historically has been the experience of African American people in this country. And so it happened in a beautiful way. Although I designed it and made it to be a memorial and to not, fully close, but that kind of came about as I received the feedback, and I thought about just the consistent perspective that a lot of people have about even what a book should be.
Hmm.
This was my first
Mhm.
artist book, and I'm thinking, wow, I thought I had more liberty. Because after all, a book is in the form,
Mhm.
an artist book is in the form of a book, or inspired by the book. And I'm telling this to students every day. And then I make my
Hmm.
first artist book, and it's like, oh, this isn't like a book. And it's like, duh.
Yeah.
So all these things are going through my mind, and I really
Mm.
had to just really think about it deeply and not allow it to affect my art making moving forward.
Mm. Yeah.
I had one note, and it's not to backtrack on any
Hmm.
gratitude to Marshall, because I think Marshall, you are very gifted at noticing things. You are a very talented and experienced curator, and
Hmm.
you understand visual language very well. So for you to articulate that observation may have been the first time it was said literally to you, Sauda, but I think that sometimes the work itself has a way of becoming complete without the creator knowing literally what aspects are making it complete. So I wouldn't offshore the credit 100% to Marshall. And again, that's not to take away. I think there's a there's a working relationship that I think we can have with each other that's obviously at play here, where we're helping each other to understand ourselves better. And art is a great vehicle for those conversations.
Yeah, and I think my obvious observation was about something that existed in the piece.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen it. And there's a very blurry zone between intentionality and intuition,
Hmm.
especially in art making, because we don't completely, I mean, some artists do. Their work's really boring. If you're going to completely intellectually preconceive your artwork, I mean, good luck. But I think it is, to me, it's more interesting that that an artwork can surpass the intentions of the creator, because it's done from an act of passion, and there's emotional investment in the creation of the piece that um, provides far more experience for the reader or the audience than maybe is immediately intellectually articulated to the artist. Um, I also thought the other interesting thing about this piece is the title. Never forget is a phrase that has been somewhat appropriated by, Zionist exceptionalists as like the word to refer to the German Holocaust of the Jews, you know, and like that's the one thing we should never forget. Well, we're supposed to forget like the imperialist crusade against indigenous peoples around the world. We're supposed to forget the Israeli war against the Palestinians. We're only supposed to remember this one thing, or Armenia or Ukraine or, fill in the blanks. And I think that was that's a stance in a way for a global audience. But I believe, Sato, when we talked about it, you said, "Oh, I wasn't really thinking about that either," because you were thinking about a particular audience, and there's always multiple audiences that we're not always going to conceive. The artwork is going to go to many places we don't know about, and it's going to have those impacts on audiences that we're not necessarily aware of. And I think that is very interesting. That it shows the strength of a piece. So this makes me wonder, um, where, as you get more involved in kind of addressing pedagogy at a systemic institutional level in your doctoral studies, where do you see your material arts practice going?
Um, I think it's going to kind of help me to moving forward think about the places and the spaces where different types of people, um, different types of students on different educational levels will engage with my work. Not that I didn't consider that beforehand, but when I created my artist books, it was for an exhibition. Like, I honestly did not know that this would be the outcome. And I say that to people all the time because, you know, I would love to take the credit and say, I did this exhibition and I knew that, but that was not the case. This was totally unexpected. And now that the institutions that have been interested in my work, and now that I know, they will be used as teaching tools, I'm more cognizant, and I'm going to use that in a way so that I am, this is my platform to tell the stories and to provide access to all of the documents and the archival material that I know is out there, and in a way kind of hidden. Not necessarily because the institutions are hiding them away, but there may be groups of people that aren't comfortable in being in those spaces. And so I want to introduce the archives, and I want to share stories. And I'm thinking about, my artist books as educational tools. And by studying institutional systems and leadership and management, and thinking about, ultimately how I can bring about that change and access to creative works, thinking about pedagogy. That's kind of where I'm going with it. That's what I'm thinking about now. I think that will be the difference moving forward.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's you're so modest. I mean, when I look back now at our timeline, I think that the whole first year of
Hmm.
our relationship, our professional
Yeah.
relationship, I first met you at SCAD in Savannah. I don't think you said anything about being an artist at all until a year later, and the second time we met. It was
I know.
Yeah, when I
I
first heard about you,
know.
Sada, I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, the librarian does books?" And it had already sort of cemented in my mind, which is also a little bit of like, what was why do I think so narrow-mindedly about people in general that I'm like surprised, right? But
Yeah.
yes, to your modesty, I think these things you don't necessarily need to be telling people all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I first you know, uh accepted the role, and I teaching with artist books was a part of my responsibilities and duties. It was a learning curve for me because I was like, what is an artist book? I'd seen, like, I'm used to the traditional archival material. And so although I was an artist, again, it was me, merging all of these little compartmentalized, things in my background. And so I felt like, having worked with students and, seeing other book artists work, I was inspired. So I think I probably didn't say anything because I was still in awe of the possibilities, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to investigate my own work and create my own work. in a way that was true to what I wanted to say. So I I don't know if I could devote all that to modesty, but it was, I was just in awe of the materials, and I wanted to learn everything that I could before I, embarked on my own journey and, carved out, the way in which I wanted to work with materials and how I wanted to format my own work. So I was still exploring, I think. I was still kind of like exploring.
We are going to have two parts to this podcast.
I know.
It's two.
We're
Yeah.
we're nearing
We're at
the
like
end. I
2
can
hours
feel
here.
it. But Sauda, will you come back?
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
I feel like this could
Absolutely.
be like, I want to check in with you, when you have time during your PhD
Yeah.
program to
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
what's coming up for you that's rolling into your practice as an artist and a librarian and as an
Yeah.
educator. Um, a couple things I just wanted to note
Mhm.
is how much I appreciate the different binding techniques that you bring to your books.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that there was a concertina binding, there was an according binding, and I think I'm going to say it correctly, the North African binding technique. Is it tacketed?
Yes, that's perfect. Yes.
I mean, it's really incredible to then think, okay, you're an artist of artist books, and
Mhm.
you didn't just learn a binding technique and then
Mhm.
ran with it.
Mhm.
You really invested a
Mhm.
lot of time and skill into learning binding techniques that suited the projects that you endeavored to make.
Mhm.
And I wanted to express my acknowledgement that I see that, and it's incredible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I think that goes back to me being a researcher and me
Ah,
minoring in art history during,
yes.
my art education. Um, just trying to be as representative as much as possible and paying homage to those geographical areas in which I'm talking about in terms of the content and the experience of the people who pass through those areas, and not just picking a binding, but saying, hey,
Mm-hmm.
there's like some research and there are actual manuscripts, in those areas that have this binding. And that's just another,
Oh my gosh.
another layer for students to explore when they're looking at
Hmm.
the work, and another, opportunity for discovery for students and engagers of this work.
Yeah, I think that's really exemplified by the Your Timbuktu book
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we could pretty much do an entire podcast on every one of your books because they all are so referential to these
Mm,
very rich histories.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I think that's one of the things that really appealed to me about your work is there's a definitive sense of who you are as an artist in
mm,
terms of your accomplishments across many disciplines, but also in just the generosity of your work to engage with really large chunks of history,
mm,
um,
mhm,
often, you know, uh, related to the Black experience, both
mhm,
African and African American,
mhm.
but not always, and
Right.
certainly, you know, in the sense that every archivist is sort of a globalist.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
it really that scope, I think, is something that I see in people who work in the archival field. Like
mhm,
it's almost like to me, I think I don't know. It impresses me so much because I before I met archivists, I thought I was a person who could handle a lot of data, and then you meet these people who are like, well,
Yeah.
after I read that 10,000th
Yeah.
book, about the early Greek Empire, I realized, and you just realize that there are people who have varying abilities to absorb
mhm,
information, and the
mhm,
people who are the most talented at absorbing information are usually librarians or archivists.
mm, mm.
And so it's always interesting to see that reflected in the work.
Yeah. I really have to thank, Booklet for agreeing to represent me and, go to bat for me when I have, you know, questionable feedback, and be willing to say, this is the reason why, or, get to know the artist, or, learn a little bit more about her background and not just say, oh, well, that's just it. That's how, you feel, and that's okay. Um, so and then, I don't think there could be a more perfect match, considering Bookland's mission and the other artists that you represent and the themes that they're exploring. And I'm just really excited to be a part of everything that Bookland is doing. So thank you all for representing me.
You're
Well,
totally
we
welcome.
are here for you, Sauda.
Oh, thanks.
100%. And I want to say too, I think this is all part of why we do the work that we do, because the education doesn't just exist within the realm of, once it's in the library. It's in everything. It's from the artist to us to the librarian and back and forth. And literally every bit of discourse is curriculum to some extent. And so we're educating each other with every one of these negotiations of content. And I think this is part of why I love it, and why I don't think of it as like negative, or I don't put it in a bucket like that was negative feedback, although it felt that way. It's like, this is an opportunity to build.
Absolutely.
So thank you also for the opportunity to be able to engage in that discourse.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
So I also want to say to anyone listening, thank you to you for listening, and check out the show notes. We'll have ways for you to connect with Sauda Mitchell and her work. And if you're a librarian or curator and you're working at an educational institute and you like what we're talking about, you're interested in collecting Sauda's work or others like it, email us at hello@bookland.org. It's like Brooklyn, but no R. And you can also check out our full catalog on Bookland's website, bookland.org. Bye, Sauda.
Bye.
Bye, Sauda. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
This podcast was made possible in part by funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and in partnership with the City Council, and from individual donors to Bookland Inc. You can support this podcast by making a donation at bookland.org/donate.